I've just turned on the recording.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right. Hello and welcome. Welcome to the 5th episode of the Society for Organic Urban Land Care 2022 Year of the Ecological Garden series, a year-long weekly series held every Tuesday at this time. Thank you very much for taking the time today to join us. And my name is Christine Earnshaw. I'm a project lead with SOL, and I'm your host today. I live and work in Ottawa on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. To give you some background for today's presentation, in 2021, SOL launched a program called Greener Green Spaces to recognize urban green spaces such as city parks, gardens, campuses across the country that are designed, cared for, and nurtured using practices that support ecological health, promote biodiversity, and take steps to minimize waste and ecological footprints. We are very pleased that this year we were able to recognize 26 sites from 8 provinces across the country. Just admitting people. For this Ecological Garden series, each week during the month of February, we are featuring one of the recognized Greener Green Spaces. The webinar format today is a presentation followed by a discussion. As host, I will facilitate the question and answer discussion by monitoring questions in the chat box, but I also wish to let you know to raise your hand if you're interested to ask a question directly and unmute yourself to ask. The episode is being recorded and everyone who registered will have access to the link following this presentation today. And finally, I have to say that SOL's work to promote awareness and practice of organic and ecological urban land care, and much of the work we do is made possible by the generous and ongoing support of Gaia College. Finally, I'm ready to introduce today's guest presenter. We have Phil Johnson, an organic master gardener, SOL practitioner based in Regina. Phil has been practicing organic urban land care for the last 5 or so years. He works in private with private clients, but also in different spaces around the city. So today, Phil is here to present, as I said, the Greener Green Spaces.
I think you froze up, Christine.
I think she did. I would say, Phil, if you want to go ahead and start your presentation, I know the spiel and Christine was just about done. So if you want to go ahead and start yours while she's working on coming back into the room.
I think
yep.
Wait, who's not in the room?
You weren't, you froze.
I froze. Oh,
yes.
I'm sorry.
That's okay, it's not your fault, it's Zoom. I was just saying that you had pretty much finished when it froze up. So if Phil wanted to go ahead and start his presentation, we were actually at the right spot for that.
All right, well, I will start. And so as Christine said, my name is Phil Johnson, and I'm in Regina, Saskatchewan, where amazingly it's about +2 today. And normally this time of year it's about -15, and this year it's been more likely to be -25 or -30. So anyway, we're in very nice warm weather now. So I'm an organic master gardener, SOL practitioner. I'm coming to you from Treaty 4 territory, Regina, Saskatchewan. Christine said a little bit about me that I've actually been an organic gardener. That would be a small O organic gardener for the last 30 years at least. And I've been a gardener most of my life. I have worked at other jobs, of course, too. It's been kind of a sideline for me as far as having private clients, but I've had private clients for at least 30 years now. And I do help various organizations with their gardening projects. And one that's coming up in the coming year that I'm quite excited about and doing lots of preparation for these days is to build a food forest in one of the poorer sections of Regina. So that'll be starting in April. So the talk that I'm going to give today is really, it's sort of a history of what we've done, a chronology of what we've done at the Peace Garden and in downtown Regina. So in 2015, it was the Peace, one of the Peace groups, or the Peace collection of peace groups in Regina came together with Knox Metropolitan United Church, and I think it was through one individual that he sort of got it started. His name's Bob Ivanachko, and his name will come up a few times probably throughout this, as will his picture. And because he's been quite a driving force, and he's the person that asked me to get involved in this project too, because I was not involved with the Peace Group and I was not involved with Knox Metropolitan United Church, but I was brought in to provide some gardening expertise for the project, because the group, they wanted to see things improved at this garden because it's very visible, and they wanted to make a statement about peace at the same time. And so I got the call, and I'm really glad that I took that call. So that was in about 2017 that I got the call. So for the first couple of years, the group, they did what they could. They tried to clean up. They did clean up the grounds, and but they wanted to do more. So it was previously lawn. A big chunk of it was lawn, flowers, shrubs, trees. It was the church itself and church membership that looked after the grounds, and I think their maintenance person probably looked after the lawn. Bob Ivanachko, Florence Stratton were key to the partnership. Florence from the Peace Quest group, and Bob from the church. And I think Bob crossed over actually with the Peace group as well. So it was originally back in 2015, and including up to 2017, it was going to be just one section of the church grounds would be the Peace Garden, and the rest of it would just sort of be something else. I just don't think they'd saw the opportunity that they had there. So the garden space was expanded in 2018 and again 2020 when the lawn was removed. And it was by happy accident there that the city was rebuilding Victoria Avenue, which is a main thoroughfare running past the church. And they they widened the sidewalk, and in the process, they took out a lot of the lawn. And the church wasn't able to look after the lawn, so it was in quite bad shape, because we generally have drought here these past few years, and it was a hot, dry summer that particular year. So anyway, we expanded in 2018 and expanded again in 2020, and now have 5,000 square feet for gardening. It's an ecological gardening. Now, the previous talks have touched on the idea of the ecological garden and what it is. And in our case, what we see it as is promoting peace and cooperation with nature, as well as among people. So we have plantings that are for pollinators, butterflies, birds, and people. The garden is fully organic, where you've started to emphasize native plants. It wasn't originally a native plant garden, but most of the plants that we are putting in now and have been putting in over the last couple of years are natives. It's entirely volunteer run. It's always open to the public. We have pathways that people can walk through. We have a bench where people can sit. And we have a homeless situation, a pretty serious homeless situation in Regina. And we have homeless people that also sleep in the garden, and in fact do some work for us. So it's at a very visible downtown location near a park, city hall, and a busy street. So this is the way it was in 2017. It was the year that Bob had first called me about it, and I went down and took a photo of the way it looked at the time. And so this happens to be very early spring. But why I've got this photo is to show the size of the lawn compared to the size of the plantings. And some of the plantings at that time were shrubs, whether it's juniper or potentilla. There were a number of mature trees, like the spruce tree that you can see at the back. but it was largely lawn. There were some rose bushes and some smaller plants at the time. And then it was evolving. The group did some work edging that lawn, and we never did any work on the lawn at all, and other than slowly reduce the size of it and find space for more plants. And we put in that bench that you can see there, barely see, under our spreading hawthorn tree, a big, beautiful hawthorn tree that is fantastic when it's in flower. And we'd planted additional perennials and some annuals in. So that was 2018. And this is the way it is now. That would be the section that we were just looking at. So what we've got here is quite a variety of things because it's a new garden, new plantings. It's a mix. We've got more annuals in probably than what we will have in the near future, but some of these annuals I think are quite spectacular. Like there's the annual salvia and the cosmos to go with our anise hyssop. We've got even shrubs in this little gathering of plants here with spirea. So it's quite a mix, and that's sort of what we've done all throughout this garden is combined. Well, we've also got native grasses that are barely visible here at about the middle right of the picture. So they're quite new, and they'll come into prominence more so as probably so it's a cool spot on a hot day. What used to be lawn here and mostly dead grass and weeds, we've turned it into mostly a perennial garden, but as I say, with a few small shrubs and some grasses, and a nice cool place for people to come and sit on one of our many hot summer days. So here's, it's a peace garden. We've got to have a peace symbol for sure. And the first picture that I'd shown in this slide presentation of the peace symbol, that was all had to be taken out because of the construction that the city was doing on the sidewalk, the widening of the sidewalk and the street work. And so we decided, well, we'd like to have it in at least as prominent a place. And so we put it about halfway through and by the sidewalk of the main space of the Peace Garden. So that was September 2020. That's Bob standing there supervising, and that's Pablo, who is his worker, laying the bricks there for the peace symbol. And so this is what it looks like today, or as of last summer, with the peace symbol in and the plants around it. And we've got creeping thyme in the middle. And eventually, of course, you will note that the thyme will probably try to grow over the bricks. So that's going to be a maintenance issue for us as time goes along, to make sure that the thyme doesn't get carried away. So some eco features that we have in our garden there, and the processes that we use. So we focus on healthy soil first and foremost, and our belief is that if we create healthy soil, we do what we can to create healthy soil. The soil will create healthy plants, and we will have many fewer problems in the future because we have those healthy plants. So we do composting, mulching, no-till, other than some initial work in an area that I'll show you in a few minutes, which was a special problem. We use an organic fertilizer to get things going, but there's really not much need to fertilize after the plants are in the ground. And we also planted all of our plants with mycorrhizal fungi in order to speed the growth and improve the plant's gathering ability of nutrients in the soil. So we've used what I call appropriate plants, meaning plants that they're for our zone. The Peace Garden, most of it is in sunny, hot location. So these are plants that can take the high heat. Last summer, for example, we had many temperatures approaching 40 degrees. And so, of course, watering is essential even for some of the native plants that we want to keep going. Plants for pollinators, we've got plants for butterflies, for birds, and also to encourage beneficial insects, predators that keep the pests in control. And so far we haven't had a pest control problem other than gophers, which I'll talk about later. But and I think this method is as good as any, allowing the beneficial insects to set up a home in your garden, and that way they can control the pests, and we don't have to. Garden is in bloom early spring to late fall. Plants are left standing over winter as food and habitat, and also to collect snow. And we've got a place where birds and insects can get water that's kept filled. And our pathways are all made from crusher dust, which is recycled crushed rock and or concrete. And it makes a very nice firm surface, and it's quite inexpensive to buy. Just takes some labor to lay it. So this is one part of the garden that we've not quite finished, but it's just to highlight one of the things that we did where there was grass and where the city was doing construction, like they were going to be doing here. So we weren't doing very much work on this corner of the garden, but there was lawn there. And what we decided to do was the turf was mostly dead, and we just turned it over. We scraped it off, turned it over, and left it there as mulch. And we wet it and let the soil, give the soil microbes something to drink, but just let it sit there as our mulch. So we just turned over the turf, and it actually worked very well for us. And here's another section of the garden, which I call the West Garden. And in June 2018, we actually started work on it, but a few weeks before that, there'd been a few trees that in this area that were really not supposed to be there, such as Manchurian elms, and there were a couple of very unhealthy spruce trees. And the church wanted to know if we were interested in taking over this section as well for the Peace Garden. And we were quite enthusiastic about that and said that yes, we would do that. And if the church would take out the old trees, and there weren't many. It was quite a waste area actually, and there wasn't even much grass growing in here. And so they did that. The church did that. They hired a contractor who took out the trees and then brought in some topsoil and spread the topsoil on a rainy day. So we had incredibly compacted soil, since the soil here in Regina is generally has a high component of clay. And it can get hard very quickly. And that's what we ran into with this. And you can see at the far end here, that's one of our volunteers, Mark, actually using a pick to try to open up the soil. And our idea here was to break up the soil, not to turn it, not to cultivate it, but to open it up, and then to pour compost in, and then to mulch over that, and then to put water on it and let it sit. And so that's what we did. We let it sit, and here's what we did 1 month later. We normally I wouldn't say that I wouldn't recommend to people that they use poplar mulch, poplar chip mulch in a perennial bed, but it just happened to work out. Bob, again, had a large poplar tree in his yard, and he needed it to be cut down. It was hanging over his house. And we got the chips free of charge. And so it actually worked quite well. And this is in 2021. This is what that same garden looked like, the one that had the compaction problem. So the methods that we used had worked quite well. The planting and maintenance, it's entirely by volunteers. We do work bees, or people just go down when they feel like it and they know what to do and they just go and do it. So we had a list of people with certain days to do watering, which was essential, especially the last summer where we had a drought and high heat. We pick garbage, we do hand watering and pruning, and I do most of the pruning on the trees there because I have a chainsaw and I have some other pruning tools as well. So we do close planting in order to shade out the possibility of weeds coming up. We do chop and drop mulching in the spring. That suppresses the weeds, retains moisture, improves the soil. We feed the soil if we think necessary using alfalfa pellets. So that would only be in certain areas of the garden where it seems like the plants are struggling. So it's very infrequent that we would need to fertilize this garden. Actually, some of the soil that we found there when we started the project back in 2017 was quite good soil. So didn't need a lot of improvement, except in that area that I showed previously that was so badly compacted. So we do spread some compost in what are going to be our planting areas for the year. We do pest control by beneficial insects. So we select and plant insectary plants, those that are designed to draw in the predators that will take care of the pests for us. And so far, things have been going very well that way. We've got wire cages against gopher predation. A couple of years ago, we did have quite a gopher problem there. The city does pest control in their own way, and whatever that might be, I'm pretty sure it's not organic. So what we try to do is put cages around those plants that we think are susceptible to the gopher's appetites. And we also select plants that gophers don't like. That's like going forward, starting last year, that's our main approach, is to just put in plants that gophers don't like. This is a picture of Florence, one of our key volunteers from the Peace Quest group, watering some of our plants. That's Heliopsis, a native to this area, false sunflower, also known as. And some reed grass, not a native. We've got about half a dozen native grasses that we put in around our various planting areas. And reed grass, this is the feather reed grass, is the only one. It's a beautiful grass, but it's the only one that's not native that we've put in. And I think I put this slide in just because I really like the combination of plants. The goldenrod in the middle there, the annual salvia in the bottom, and the more wispy looking Russian sage there on the left. And that these are all plants that they just hum with various types of bees and flies and wasps in the summertime, and it's quite a thing. You want to come and take a photo of a bee. This garden's doing a tremendous job in bringing them in, I think. Sages and goldenrod and many other plants there as well. So paying for it all, how do we pay for it? Well, the church includes the garden in its annual budget. And I think this year, our budget is going to be about $500 from the church. I think it's going to be that. The city provided quite a lot of funding due to the damage they did to the lawn during the reconstruction of the street and sidewalk back 2 years ago. And they wanted to just replace the lawn. And we said, no, we'd sooner have our pollinator garden expanded. And they said, okay, well, we'll just give you the same amount of money that we would have spent on the lawn. And so that came to probably about $2,500 that they gave us for plants, and also for edging and anything else we wanted to do in the garden there, really. So I thought that was very generous of the city. We get private donations, a few small private donations. We have, of course, volunteer labor. We have connections with a local garden center that will provide us with free annuals, and they give us a cut rate on perennials and shrubs and trees. And the native Regina, or the Nature Regina Native Plant Garden, which has also been recognized in the Green Spaces program, of course, we have connections with them, and Regina being a relatively small city. And so we can get free native plants, and we have got a number of the plants that are growing in our garden are from the Nature Regina Native Plant Garden, and they also make seeds available if we want them. And that concludes my presentation, and but with a quote by Arundhati Roy, that another world is not only possible, she is on her way. So we're missing a P, but so I think we've made a little bit of a different world down there around the church, and the church is actually has been telling us that they get so many compliments about the way the outside of the building and the grounds are looking. And so that the church actually put together a 5-minute YouTube video that I think Christine has attached to the profile for our garden. And it's, you could have a look at that as well and see the garden from a slightly different perspective. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Phil. Beautiful, beautiful images, and really good to hear about the whole process and species that are there. So yeah, the first thing I have to say, it's nice to hear that you mentioned Nature Regina, because it is a partner, something Regina is small, as you say, so it's good to know that you're in touch, and that sort of seems to be like the nice networking that happens at that local scale. And what we're hoping with Sol's Greener Green Spaces program is that we're able to also just network some of these other gardens that are similar, and ways that we can share information. So yeah, that's the Regina situation, but there's other pollinator gardens, especially like throughout the country. Even next week we'll be presenting one. So it's just nice to see what's happening in another urban environment. I'll start off with the questions, but I will remind people, if they have questions, they can raise their hand and ask directly, or otherwise you can put the questions in the chat and I'll be happy to read them out to Phil. And maybe if I could just start with a question right now, and that is a very practical one, and it's because we're in the middle of winter, and just sort of seeing how urban this space is and how it is directly beside a busy road. And I just wonder about the use of salt, if that's what Regina uses, if that's on the roads, if that's on the sidewalks, and how the garden handles the salt, or what is also the methods of the gardeners to help protect the plants, and if it's salt or sand or whatever it is.
Well, I'm sure open to suggestion for anyone else that has problems with salt in the snow from the sidewalk. But in our case, if you go by the garden today, what you see are huge mounds of snow that have been shoveled up from the sidewalk, and they've been placed on the garden. And of course, the garden's covered in snow anyway. And so whoever's doing the shoveling doesn't necessarily know what they're putting the salt-laden snow on. So what we've been doing is, so I've been doing some research on it, and trying to find salt-tolerant plants. So just like we are planting gopher-tolerant plants, we've also got salt-tolerant plants, and amazingly, there's some crossover there. And they happen to be plants that we want in the garden too. So that's one of the ways that we're dealing with it, is just picking plants that can grow in the salt. And another thing that we've done is the ever reliable compost. Those areas get composted regularly. And this past year, what I also did is applied gypsum, which is calcium and sulfur. And that was because I had read somewhere that the gypsum is quite good to enable or improve the movement of water and the availability of water to plants. in salty soil. So that's kind of an experiment on my part to see how that's going to work. But I think I don't really know what the salt load is that's going onto the lawn. But this picture here, the last one in my slideshow, this is sort of more of one of our somewhat troubled areas. So the plants here are smaller, and we've had a bit more trouble getting things to grow. And this is also a place where the salt gets piled up, or the snow gets piled up. So so this is an area. This is a problematic area, and it's partly because of the salt, I think. So that's what we're doing. And if anybody has any solutions that have worked for them, I'm all ears.
Yeah. Okay, well, there's a question in the chat asking what, in the Regina context, what are some good plants for bringing in predators, such as wasps?
Oh, yeah. And the wasps that I'm talking about there are, and people probably know, but it's the parasitoidal wasps. And we try to encourage a variety of different types of flies, like hover flies or syrphid flies and taconid flies, and things that people wouldn't necessarily recognize as wasps or flies for that matter. And so the things that we're doing is, what I found is that herbs are really good for bringing in the beneficial insects. And in my own yard, I have a large garden here, and I always make sure that I've got herbs spread around the yard. So it's things like coriander, it's things like dill, oregano, then some of the more conventional native flowers or non-native flowers, things like cosmos. We've got sunflowers. There's quite a number. What the beneficial insects are looking for is it's the nectar, and to a certain extent also pollen, but the nectar will bring them in. And then they will find that if you've got a decent habitat for them, they will decide to set up house if they see some pests around, something that their larvae can feed on. Then they'll lay their eggs there. And so, I just think it's the way to go in pest control. And we don't bring in we don't buy beneficial insects like ladybugs or anything like that to release in the garden, because I think that we should be able to develop our own community of beneficials here. And I think that's happening, but time will tell. It's all a new garden. It hasn't had time for the bad pests to find it. But I've been following similar methods in my own garden here for almost 30 years, and I don't have a pest problem. I'm absolutely convinced it works, and this is what I get other people to do too in some of my private clients.
All right, another question then. How did you tackle persistent perennial weeds?
We pulled them. We used the weed rod, just that long thing that looks like a big spike. Follow the roots down and lever the roots out of the ground as best as we can. And we continually did that. Initially, we would go in, we'd do a blitz to get rid of the weeds, and then 3 weeks or months later, we'd do a blitz again and get rid of them. And we still have weeds coming up. Weed seeds are always going to be present, but so we never really got rid of the weeds, because I don't really believe you can get rid of the weeds. They will continue. Seeds are everywhere, and in the right conditions, they'll sprout. So we pick them. We've got willing volunteers to go there and who want to do work in the garden. So we just make sure that every volunteer knows what's a weed and what's the valuable plant. And then with those weeds, generally what we do, unless they're full of seeds, we just lay them on the soil and let them feed the soil. So it's, I wouldn't even call it all that labor intensive. Like we plant quite densely. So the plants that we put in are fairly close together. And as they mature, they're going to create even less space for light to get through to the soil. But we also, when we, that lawn that I showed early on, the big lawn, we actually turned that whole thing over. All the turf, we scraped it out and turned it upside down. And so the point there was to act as a mulch and also feed the soil as it was breaking down. And then we just planted directly, we just cut holes in that overturned turf and put our plants in. And eventually those, the turfs of Kentucky bluegrass, whatever other things were in there, they, because the roots were exposed to the air because it was turned upside down, so that sort of just died and decomposed and became part of our soil. So now you can hardly recognize that there was any turf there at all. So that's what we've done. It's been an ongoing, the weed removal is, it's an ongoing process. We still have to have once every month or 6 weeks, we have to do a weeding bee.
Well, it does sound like there's a lot of involvement by these volunteers. And just if you could comment on that, just what impact do you think this garden has had, and especially the approaches of organic land care on the volunteers?
Well, I think, I think they're quite proud of what they've done. And, and it's a group that they would have been on side with organic land care anyway, but that they probably weren't sure as to how to get there and how to do it. And because you hear so much about all the problems that farmers will have converting from chemical-based farming to organic or regenerative gardening or farming. And that's just the way that's in the media space. That's what people understand about organic is you're going to have problems with weeds. And that doesn't mean some don't, but there are ways to deal with it, especially in a situation like ours. So, I think they're quite proud of the work that they've been doing. And when they're out there working and the public are walking by, because there's many office buildings down there too, so people go out walking, and they always get compliments from people. So that's really good for our volunteers to hear that, to get all the compliments from the public.
Well, Sadora has a question asking if there's any community pushback around planting goldenrod in the city.
No, not at all. No, the different I've got about we have about 4 different types of goldenrod growing in the garden. Some of them are natives and some of them are native cultivars. And so no, there's been no concern about it. They're not the weedy variety at all. And I know some people might be concerned about getting, they might be allergic to it, but it's not actually goldenrod. I think it's ragweed. And they kind of look alike, but people confuse ragweed with goldenrod, and they have the allergy to ragweed. And there may be some individual that has allergies to goldenrod, but was that your concern, Sandara? About?
I know all those things. I was just curious if you were actually dealing with it because I know some people here in Ottawa, when they plant goldenrod, there is still such a wide misconception about
Right.
whether or not they are the source of allergies.
Yeah.
That yes, people react rather than understand that it's a different species that is really ecologically important. So I was just curious about the difference geographically, if you run into the same things there that some people run into in Ottawa, where
Well, so far we haven't. I think people are, there's such a variety of plants growing there, and it's just it's so colorful that I don't know whether people have stopped to actually identify every single plant and the ones they think might be problems. There's others in there that people might think that the conventional gardeners might think would be problems. Like we've got lots of yarrow as well, and yarrow will spread. We've got lots of columbine. It will spread by seed fairly readily. But I so far we just haven't been getting complaints. And people are just happy.
comes with flowers.
What are the plans for the garden, the future of this garden?
Well, the future is like areas like where this sign is here. We've always had a bit of a situation with the sign. The sign comes and goes, and it often gets put up in the wintertime. And when we were creating our pathways here, we actually made this larger crusher dust space to accommodate the sign. And then sometimes the sign is there and sometimes it's not. The company that puts up the sign, they move it in the wintertime, so they don't really know what's underneath. So I don't know if the sign, I wish the sign would be permanent, stay in one place, and then we could remove some of this crusher dust and put more plants in. And so there's other sections of the garden too that we need to finish. And that should be done this summer, this spring and summer. Since I do most of the selecting of what should be planted, I'm right now looking at ordering some more native plants to put in. So we're focusing on the native plant aspect. I'd like to make it a little bit more, it's very people friendly now. People can come and, it's open, as I say, it's open all the time. And you can't close it off. But I would like a couple more benches, maybe just make it a bit more people friendly so that people come and actually sit there. And maybe even small groups can gather. And I would say those are our near future plans anyway.
Okay, well, we're getting close to the end, and I just thought if anybody has any suggestions for Phil about the salt and the using gypsum, then put that in the comments, please. Otherwise, yeah, I'm just curious about Regina itself as an urban place, and we know that many other jurisdictions, municipal jurisdictions, are looking at climate change. They're developing strategies, maybe around biodiversity, and so I'm wondering if this garden, well, I know it contributes, but does it impact or does it contribute to the city of Regina's strategies for addressing things like climate change and biodiversity loss?
Well, I think it does. And, there are people in the city that at City Hall that are making a big push on things like native plantings. The city has designation now as a tree city, and Regina really is in the middle of the hot prairie. It's a forest, and it's a lot of those would be planted native trees like American elms and green ash, and there's poplars and willows. So there's a lot of trees, but it's Regina's now been designated as a tree city. And part of that development out on the street, it's Victoria Avenue that runs by the church here. and that we lost one summer's work because they were rebuilding it and rebuilding the sidewalk. They took the old street out completely, and in the middle of the street, they put planters, and there are now a number of trees that the city has put in. And so it's going to be quite a beautiful row of trees once they mature. And so the city is sort of at a crossroads in a way. Like we've got a council that from the last civic elections, that see the environment as important, and so they're making pushes. The city staff are pushing in a more environmentally friendly direction. But of course, there's always the old pushback. My own city councilor here has gotten a group together to start a movement because she's going to make a proposal to ban the cosmetic use of pesticides in the city, and I'm on her committee as well. That's advising on how to do that, and so there are things happening. But Regina is just, it's just a bit behind, behind other places so often.
That sounds lovely, the forest ideal. Anyway, so Trish, she did respond to the question. She lives in Ottawa in a corner lot. She installed a 24-inch mulch sidewalk, so to speak, along one side of the property where the city plows heavily in the winter. And Ottawa uses a lot of salt as well. And so it's a buffer between the lawn and garden and the road. Thank you, Trish. Anyway, we're at 3:45, so this is sort of the nice block that we set aside for today's conversation. So thank you very, very much, Phil, for being our presenter for the 5th episode of this year-long weekly series that we're running. So thank you all also for joining and asking questions and just being part. It's nice to see some names that are coming up and are following along. We'll be back next week with another Greener Green Spaces recipient. Presenting is Bev Wager, and she will be coming with a couple other people, I think, who are representative as well of this community garden, and they'll be presenting on the Pipeline Trail Pollinator Paradise in Hamilton. So that's another one of the Greener Green Spaces, focusing a lot on habitat and pollinator gardening. And so that's the Ontario context that we're talking about next week. And just a final reminder about this series: if you are interested to get the link, then you'll have to register for each week's session so that you'll have the link to the recording. Thank you very much. Phil, you can check out some of the comments. Thanking you for the presentation today.
Okay, well, thank you, Christine, and thanks everyone.
All right, so enjoy the rest of the day and stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.